This is the part 2 of the story. I never truly loved you, her CEO husband said during an argument. She did the unthinkable.
I never truly loved you the way you think!
What? How could you say that?
It's the truth.
Welcome, all new and returning viewers, and remain blessed. Settle in, let's continue.
I built a company that survived global downturns, but I couldn't protect the one relationship that mattered most.
The front door closed with a softer sound than Arden expected. For years, that sound had been followed by Salira's steady presence somewhere inside the house. A light in the kitchen, the faint sound of pages turning in the living room, the quiet rhythm of someone who made a space feel lived in. Tonight, there was nothing. Arden loosened his tie slowly and stepped forward. The living room looked untouched, almost staged. The sofa cushions sat perfectly arranged. The coffee table held no open books, no half-finished tea. Even the air felt different, lighter but colder. He walked toward the kitchen. The dining table stood clean, chairs aligned neatly. He paused near the chair she once used. Without thinking, he rested his hand on its back, as if expecting warmth to remain there. The house was not damaged, nothing dramatic had happened, yet something essential was gone. He moved upstairs. The bedroom felt larger. Her side of the closet had space where clothes once hung. The dresser surface no longer held her jewelry tray. He opened a drawer and found it nearly empty. For years he believed stability meant walls, ownership, structure. Now he understood something else. A house without shared presence is only architecture. He stood still in the center of the room, absorbing the quiet. For the first time since their argument, the silence did not feel temporary. It felt permanent. And that realization settled heavier than any boardroom pressure he had ever carried. The next morning, Arden arrived at the office earlier than usual. The lobby lights had barely been turned on when he stepped inside, briefcase in hand, posture straight, expression controlled. Routine, structure, focus, these had always restored order in his world. He entered his office and opened his laptop immediately. Emails filled the screen. Investor updates, international expansion reports, development team summaries. He welcomed the distraction. Numbers required analysis. Contracts required revision. Market projections demanded logic. None of these things required emotional reflection. By mid-morning, his calendar was packed. Meetings overlapped. Assistants shuffled schedules to accommodate last-minute calls. Arden spoke with precision, outlining objectives, revising deadlines, pushing teams forward. From the outside, nothing had changed. But internally, something felt slightly off balance. During a strategy discussion, he found himself staring at a slide longer than usual. A revenue forecast he normally would have interpreted instantly seemed unclear. He asked for clarification twice. Colleagues exchanged brief glances. He ignored it. Work was the solution. It always had been. If he moved faster, if he accelerated expansion, if he secured stronger partnerships, the discomfort would fade. Productivity would drown out memory. He repeated that belief to himself throughout the day. Yet every time his office door closed and the room fell quiet, the absence returned. Work filled his schedule. It did not fill the silence waiting for him at home. By the end of the week, subtle cracks began appearing in places Arden once managed flawlessly. A contract draft went out without his final review. A minor oversight, but unusual. The legal department corrected it quickly, though the delay caused tension with a potential partner. In another meeting, he dismissed a junior analyst's concern too quickly. Normally, he valued preparation and careful listening. This time, impatience interrupted the discussion before all details surfaced. Later that afternoon, his CFO requested a private conversation. "You seem distracted," she said carefully. "Is everything steady?" Arden responded with confidence. Expansion pressure. Nothing more, but he knew the truth. His focus felt divided. Numbers blurred for a second longer than they should. Strategic decisions required greater effort than before. He stayed later at the office that night, reviewing projections repeatedly, determined to prove nothing was slipping. Yet leadership depends on clarity, and clarity cannot exist when the mind replays unresolved conversations. He prided himself on control, on discipline, on precision. Now, tiny inconsistencies were appearing in places no one expected. He told himself it was temporary fatigue. He told himself it would pass. But deep down, he recognized something unfamiliar. For the first time in years, he was not operating at full certainty. And that unsettled him more than any competitor ever could. That night, back in the empty house, Arden sat alone at the kitchen table where everything changed. The chair across from him remained still. He closed his eyes and replayed the moment. "Do you still believe this marriage matters?" He remembered her tone. Calm, not accusing, not dramatic, just searching. Then his own voice. "I never truly loved you the way you think." The sentence echoed in the quiet room, sharper now than when it was spoken. He had meant frustration, exhaustion, emotional overload. But words do not adjust themselves after release. They land exactly as spoken. He leaned back and exhaled slowly. He remembered the early years, the waterfront walks, the quiet evenings, where she helped him process complex decisions without judgment. He had relied on that presence, more than he admitted. Now, without it, reflection felt unavoidable. Did he mean what he said? Or had he confused emotional distance with emotional absence? The distinction mattered, but the damage remained regardless. He told himself she needed time. She had always been patient, thoughtful, steady. She would reconsider. She would see that pressure influenced his response. She would return. He repeated that belief like strategy. Yet, as the minutes passed, doubt crept in. What if she wasn't waiting anymore? A week later, Arden remained at his office longer than usual. The city lights outside his window mirrored the same view he once shared with Salira during late evenings at home. His assistant entered quietly and placed a printed business journal on his desk. "You might want to see this," she said. He glanced down absent-mindedly. The headline caught his attention immediately. "Seattle-based incubator, reshaping ethical startup growth." He frowned slightly and picked up the journal. The article described a rapidly expanding incubator program focused on sustainable leadership and community-centered innovation. Investors praised its structure. Founders credited its mentorship model. Halfway through the page, he saw the name. Salira Wynn. Her photograph appeared beside a quote about balanced ambition and responsible expansion. He read the paragraph twice. The program had already secured regional partnerships. National investors expressed interest. Media coverage was increasing. Arden set the journal down slowly. She had not retreated. She had advanced. The realization shifted something inside him. She had not left in uncertainty. She had left with direction. And the life he assumed would pause without him had accelerated instead. For the first time since she walked away, reality settled clearly. She was not coming back to wait. She was building something, and the world was beginning to notice. The Singapore expansion had been months in development. Market analysis supported the move. Legal teams prepared documentation. Regional partners had signaled readiness. On paper, the agreement seemed secure. Arden entered the conference call expecting final confirmation. Instead, he was met with hesitation. A representative from the overseas firm spoke carefully. "After reviewing current projections and recent internal shifts, our board has decided to delay the partnership." Delay. The word felt controlled, but its meaning was clear. They were withdrawing. Arden leaned forward. "What internal shifts?" he asked evenly. There was a pause before the response came. "Concerns about stability at the executive level. We've sensed strategic inconsistency in the last few weeks." Strategic inconsistency. The phrase struck harder than the withdrawal itself. Arden maintained composure throughout the remainder of the call, outlining alternatives and expressing confidence in Vale Dynamics' direction. The conversation ended professionally. The moment the screen went dark, he remained still. That deal would have secured a major foothold in Southeast Asia. It was not a minor opportunity. It was a gateway. He reviewed the timeline in his mind. What had changed? The data remained strong. The infrastructure plan was solid. Yet perception matters in global markets. If partners sensed instability, even slightly, they would hesitate. For years, Arden's reputation had been precision and certainty. Now doubt had entered the narrative. He told himself it was temporary caution from risk-averse partners. Still, as he stared at the city skyline outside his office window, a rare thought surfaced. Something was slipping, and it was no longer subtle. The board meeting that followed carried a different tone from previous sessions. The long conference table felt heavier. Reports were displayed across the central screen, but this time the atmosphere lacked the usual confidence. One board member adjusted his glasses before speaking. "We've received feedback from international contacts," he began. "There's concern about recent inconsistencies in executive messaging." Arden kept his posture steady. "Expansion always involves recalibration." Another member leaned forward. "Recalibration is one thing. Perceived distraction is another." The word hung in the air. Distraction. Arden's jaw tightened slightly. "Are you questioning my commitment?" "We're questioning stability," the first member replied. Veil Dynamics operates at a scale where leadership clarity is non-negotiable. For years, these same individuals praised his decisiveness. Now they were measuring his focus. Arden responded with firm projections, outlining revised timelines and reinforcing the company's strong position in domestic markets. His voice remained calm, controlled, precise. But internally, irritation flickered. He had built this company from a shared office with limited funding. He had navigated funding rounds, competitive pressure, market volatility. Now he was being examined as if he were uncertain. The meeting concluded with formal statements about monitoring progress. Monitoring. When the board began watching instead of trusting, it signaled vulnerability. As the room emptied, Arden remained seated for a moment longer. For the first time since founding Veil Dynamics, he sensed something shifting beyond his command. Control, once absolute, now required defense. And defense implied risk. The client had been with Veil Dynamics for 3 years, a fast-growing logistics firm that relied heavily on the company's adaptive systems. The partnership was stable, profitable, and publicly cited as a success story. Until it wasn't. Arden received the update through a brief internal memo. Client transitioning to alternative platform effective next quarter. He requested an immediate explanation. The head of partnerships entered his office with visible tension. "They've decided to switch to a smaller firm," she explained. "A startup offering modular systems with more flexible customization." Arden frowned. "We offer flexibility. They're claiming this platform aligns more closely with long-term sustainability models." Sustainability models. He asked for the competitor's name. When she mentioned it, something about it sounded familiar. He couldn't immediately place why. "They secured impressive backing recently," she added. "Strong mentorship network behind them." Mentorship network. The client had cited evolving values in its official statement. They wanted partners who reflected balanced leadership and responsible scaling. Balanced leadership. Arden had built Veil Dynamics on speed, structure, precision. Now clients were seeking something slightly different. He dismissed the meeting with a short nod. A single client loss does not collapse an empire. Yet momentum shifts rarely begin with massive events. They begin with subtle redirections. As the office door closed behind his colleague, Arden stared at the company performance dashboard displayed on his screen. For the first time, growth did not feel automatic. It felt contested. Later that week, his CFO requested a private discussion. She had worked beside him for nearly a decade. Her tone was always direct but measured. Today, it carried unusual gravity. "We need to talk about executive bandwidth," she began. Arden folded his hands calmly. "Be specific." "You're spread thin," she said. "International expansion, domestic recalibration, investor reassurance. And lately, decisions are taking longer." "I'm managing multiple fronts," he replied. "You're managing them alone." The statement landed carefully. She continued, "The team senses tension. Strategy meetings are shorter. Follow-ups are delayed. That's not like you." Arden leaned back slightly. "You're implying I'm compromised." "I'm implying leadership clarity is essential. If something outside the company is affecting focus, we need to address it before markets do." Her words were not accusatory. They were protective, but they struck deeper than the board's skepticism. Because she knew him well. He remained silent for a moment before responding. "There's nothing affecting my performance." She studied him carefully. "Then prove it," she said gently. "Stability starts at the top." After she left, Arden remained seated in silence. He had always believed compartmentalization was strength. Work remained work. Personal life remained separate. Yet the line between those two worlds had blurred. And the market, unforgiving as ever, was beginning to notice. The final shift came during a routine product strategy meeting. Developers presented updates on a software revision aimed at increasing customization features. The proposal required slight adjustment to the expansion timeline. Arden listened, but his patience thinned quickly. "Why wasn't this anticipated earlier?" he asked sharply. A senior developer attempted to explain new market demands and client feedback trends. "We're adapting to feedback from mid-tier partners," she said carefully. "They're asking for more ethical reporting integration." "Ethical reporting?" Arden repeated. "Our platform focuses on scalability." "That's exactly the concern," she replied. "Clients are shifting priorities." The room grew quiet. Arden's response came faster than usual. "We don't redesign strategy every time market language changes." The tension was immediate. Normally, he would have analyzed, questioned, adjusted. Today, frustration spoke first. The meeting ended abruptly. As team members exited, the atmosphere felt different. Respect remained, but unease lingered. He stood alone in the conference room afterward, staring at the presentation screen. For years he had led from control. Now control felt fragile. For the first time, uncertainty moved faster than confidence. And just before leaving the office, he requested deeper research on the competitor that had captured their client. When the report arrived later that evening, a familiar name appeared in the mentorship column: Celera Wynn. The startup disrupting his company had come from her incubator. Control was no longer slipping quietly. It was shifting direction. "Before we move forward, do you think Arden deserves what's happening? Is this the cost of neglect, or simply the pressure of leadership catching up?" Comment below and share your perspective. Now let's continue. The first major feature appeared in a respected national business journal. Arden did not search for it. It arrived in his inbox through a standard industry digest that summarized rising trends across innovation markets. He skimmed headlines absent-mindedly at first. Then he saw her name again. Seattle Incubator, redefining leadership through sustainable strategy. He opened the article. The journalist described the incubator as a measured alternative to aggressive scale-at-any-cost models. The piece emphasized mentorship structure, responsible growth metrics, and community impact benchmarks integrated directly into each startup's development plan. Celera was quoted extensively. She spoke about leadership clarity, long-term thinking, and the cost of ambition when it operates without balance. Her words were steady, thoughtful, and precise. Arden read slowly this time. He recognized the tone, calm but firm, not emotional, not defensive, just certain. The article praised the incubator's collaborative framework. Instead of isolating founders into competition, the program encouraged shared resources and peer accountability. Investors were described as partners rather than controllers. The journalist concluded with a strong statement: as market volatility increases, leaders like Celera Wynn are, proving that disciplined growth paired with human-centered leadership may shape the next era of innovation. Disciplined growth paired with human-centered leadership. The phrasing struck him harder than he expected. For years, he believed discipline alone defined strength. He built Veil Dynamics on structure and performance metrics. Yet here was a model receiving national attention for combining strategy with emotional awareness. He leaned back in his chair and reread the final paragraph. Her photograph accompanied the piece. She stood confidently inside a bright collaborative workspace, whiteboards behind her filled with diagrams and structured notes. She did not look like someone who left in uncertainty. She looked established. The article was not framed as a personal comeback story. It was framed as a movement. For the first time, Arden realized this was not temporary visibility. This was momentum. The following week brought another development. An emerging logistics software startup announced a significant funding round, led by a respected West Coast investment firm. The announcement circulated rapidly through industry channels. Arden recognized the company name immediately. It was the same startup that had captured Veil Dynamics' mid-tier client. He requested the full funding breakdown. The numbers were substantial, enough to accelerate product refinement and market penetration within months. More importantly, the press release credited the incubator that supported the startup's early development. Celera's incubator. The release quoted one of the founders: "The structured mentorship and leadership accountability." framework we received through the program shaped our growth model from day one. We were taught to prioritize sustainability and strategic pacing rather than rapid expansion without foundation. Strategic pacing. That phrase echoed the same philosophy highlighted in the earlier article. Arden opened the competitor's updated product overview. The software offered modular flexibility combined with reporting features aligned to long-term operational transparency. He recognized the strategic influence. This was not accidental development. This was guidance. He examined the investor list attached to the funding round. Several names were familiar. Established partners he had interacted with during previous funding negotiations. They had chosen to back this startup, a company mentored by his former wife. The professional implications extended beyond one lost client. Investor alignment signals market direction. If capital began favoring sustainability-based leadership frameworks, Vail Dynamics would need to adjust narrative positioning quickly. Arden felt something shift inside him. This was not merely about competition. It was about influence. Celira had not entered the market as a quiet participant. She had entered as a strategist, and her model was producing measurable results. For the first time, Arden understood that her departure did not weaken her standing. It refined it. 2 weeks later, an international innovation summit announced its featured speakers. The event was among the most recognized global gatherings for technology leaders, venture capital partners, and policy influencers. Invitations were limited. Panels were curated carefully. Arden had spoken at this summit before. This year, his participation had been confirmed months earlier under the topic of scalable infrastructure systems. When the updated speaker list was released, he reviewed it casually. Then he stopped. Celira Wynn, founder, Northwest Ethical Growth Initiative. She was scheduled to speak on a panel titled Leadership Balance in Rapid Expansion Markets. The irony did not escape him. Her panel would precede his by 1 day. The summit website featured high-resolution banners promoting keynote speakers, each name displayed alongside a brief summary and professional photograph. Her summary described her as a rising voice in responsible innovation and sustainable scaling practices. Rising voice. He stared at the banner longer than intended. The background behind her image showed the Seattle skyline and the collaborative workspace of her incubator. Her posture reflected calm confidence. There was no reference to her past, no mention of marriage or personal transition, only leadership. The summit represented global visibility. Media coverage would be extensive. Investors would attend. Corporate alliances would form within those conference halls, and both of their companies would share the same stage. Arden closed the website tab slowly. He understood the implications clearly. This would not be a quiet acknowledgement from a distance. This would be direct proximity. Professional circles would intersect. Conversations would overlap. Comparisons would form naturally. There would be no avoiding it. They would meet again. Not in a home. Not in private. But on a global platform. In the days leading up to the summit, Arden attended a private investor dinner in San Francisco. The gathering included venture capital representatives, corporate advisors, and strategic partners from multiple sectors. Conversations shifted organically toward emerging trends. One investor mentioned growing demand for accountability-based growth models. We're seeing increased appetite for structured sustainability metrics, he explained. Founders are looking for guidance that balances expansion with long-term stability. Another added, there's a Seattle initiative making waves, strong mentorship backbone, disciplined but measured approach. Arden remained silent. A third investor leaned forward. Celira Wynn's program. She's creating something that feels timely. Markets are shifting. Investors want leaders who understand that unchecked speed creates instability. Future of ethical growth. The phrase was spoken casually during discussion, but it lingered in Arden's thoughts long after the dinner ended. For years he had been labeled visionary. Now another name was entering that space, not as a replacement, but as a contrast. Ethical growth versus accelerated dominance. Measured leadership versus aggressive scale. The market narrative was expanding. Back at his office later that night, Arden opened the summit website once more. The banner rotated across the homepage. His image appeared first, then hers, side by side in rotation. Vail Dynamics logo displayed prominently as a major sponsor. He read the sponsorship confirmation email again. Yes, the company would host a strategic roundtable at the event. There was no ambiguity. They would stand within the same professional arena. The power dynamic that once favored him exclusively had shifted. The woman he underestimated was no longer positioned behind his success. She stood on her own platform, and the world was listening. Veil Dynamics remained a headline sponsor of the summit. Their schedules were aligned. They would meet again, not as husband and wife, but as leaders. The summit hall carried a polished intensity that only global events create. High ceilings reflected soft lighting across rows of seated executives, investors, and founders from multiple continents. Conversations hummed quietly before the session began, blending accents and industries into one shared atmosphere of ambition. Arden sat near the back of the auditorium, not hidden, but not centered either. His badge identified him clearly as CEO of Veil Dynamics. Several attendees greeted him with nods of recognition as they passed. He responded politely, his expression controlled. Then the lights dimmed slightly. The moderator stepped onto the stage and introduced the panel on leadership balance in rapid expansion markets. When Salira's name was spoken, a subtle ripple of anticipation moved through the room. She walked onto the stage with steady composure. No dramatic entrance, no exaggerated confidence, just calm presence. Her attire reflected professional elegance without excess. Her posture was upright, shoulders relaxed, movements deliberate. She took her seat at the center of the panel. Arden's gaze did not leave her. He had seen her speak before, in smaller settings, community workshops, mentorship sessions. Those environments felt intimate. This was different. This was global. Large screens projected her image behind the panelists. The camera captured her expression clearly. Focused, assured, thoughtful. When the moderator invited her to open the discussion, she adjusted the microphone slightly and began. Her voice carried evenly across the hall. Not rushed, not overly rehearsed, confident. Arden felt a quiet shift within himself as she spoke her first sentence. She did not sound like someone proving a point. She sounded like someone who knew exactly what she stood for. In that moment, the distance between past and present became undeniable. She was no longer the woman sitting across from him at a dinner table asking if their marriage still mattered. She was leading a global conversation, and he was listening from the audience. Salira began by addressing a question many executives avoid. What defines strong leadership? She asked the audience. Some panelists referenced metrics, performance benchmarks, and shareholder confidence. She listened respectfully before responding. Strength without awareness creates instability, she said calmly. Rapid growth is impressive, but growth without reflection often fractures the foundation beneath it. The audience grew noticeably attentive. She spoke about expansion models that prioritize speed while neglecting the human systems supporting them. She described how founders burn out, teams disengage, and long-term clarity weakens when leadership focuses solely on external validation. Arden shifted slightly in his seat. Her words were not accusatory. They were analytical. But he recognized their origin. Emotional accountability is not weakness, she continued. It is structure. Leaders who refuse to examine their own blind spots eventually project instability onto the organizations they manage. Several attendees began taking notes. She elaborated on mentorship frameworks within her incubator, explaining how founders were guided to evaluate decision-making patterns, communication clarity, and internal balance before scaling aggressively. Markets reward speed, she said, but sustainable influence rewards discipline paired with presence. Presence, the word echoed through Arden's mind. For years, he equated leadership with control and precision. He maintained distance to preserve authority. He believed compartmentalization demonstrated strength. Yet as she explained her framework, he saw something he had overlooked. Balance did not weaken discipline. It strengthened it. The moderator asked how personal alignment affects corporate outcomes. Salira answered without hesitation. When leaders ignore unresolved tension in their own lives, it surfaces through inconsistency in strategy, tone, and vision. The hall fell completely silent for a brief moment. The statement was direct, clear, unavoidable. Arden felt its weight personally, though she never once referenced him. She did not need to. When the panel concluded, the moderator thanked the speakers and invited applause. It began as standard professional recognition. Then it grew. Rows of attendees rose gradually from their seats. Not out of obligation, out of conviction. The sound filled the hall in a sustained wave of acknowledgement. A standing ovation. Arden remained seated for a second longer than intended before standing as well. From where he stood, he could see her clearly. She did not look surprised by the response. She inclined her head slightly, offering appreciation without theatrical reaction. Investors in the front rows exchanged approving remarks. Media representatives adjusted cameras and microphones to capture post-panel commentary. Her message had resonated, not because it was dramatic, but because it aligned with a growing shift in market psychology. Attendees were not rejecting ambition. They were recalibrating its structure. Arden understood market trends. He built his career on anticipating them. And in that moment, he recognized something uncomfortable. The conversation she led was not a fringe discussion. It was central. As applause continued, he felt a complex mixture of reactions. Pride surfaced briefly. He remembered encouraging her years ago when she organized small workshops in San Francisco. He remembered her early vision for supporting founders. But pride was followed quickly by awareness. He had underestimated the scale of her impact. He had reduced her ambitions to supportive background efforts while he pursued expansion. Now the room was acknowledging her leadership on an international platform, and he was witnessing it not as her partner, but as a peer, or perhaps even as someone catching up to a shift she had already embraced. The session ended, and the crowd moved toward the networking floor outside the auditorium. Salira stepped down from the stage, greeted immediately by several investors requesting brief conversations. Industry leaders extended business cards. Conference coordinators requested follow-up interviews. She responded to each interaction with steady composure. Her tone remained consistent, thoughtful, focused, engaged. Arden stood at a measured distance, observing the flow. He had experienced this environment countless times. Investors once surrounded him with similar urgency. Journalists sought his commentary. Founders asked for guidance. Now he watched the same dynamic unfold around her. One venture capital partner gestured animatedly while discussing expansion opportunities for her incubator model. Another expressed interest in replicating her framework across multiple cities. She listened carefully before answering, just as she had always done. But now the scale of those conversations had expanded dramatically. Arden took a slow breath and stepped forward through the gathering. He did not rush. He did not interrupt. He simply moved closer. At that precise moment, Salira turned slightly as if sensing proximity. Their eyes met across the room. The surrounding conversations continued, but for a brief second, everything else felt distant. No anger, no visible tension, just recognition. He saw confidence in her expression, calm certainty, emotional steadiness. She saw him too, not as the husband who once dismissed her value, but as the executive whose industry she now influenced directly. The silence between them carried history. Years of partnership, months of separation, one sentence that changed everything. Investors continued speaking around her, unaware of the personal narrative unfolding in that quiet exchange. Arden held her gaze steadily. This was not a private reunion. It was a public collision, two leaders standing in the same arena, and the balance between them had shifted. They would speak, not as before, but as equals, and neither of them could ignore it any longer. The private meeting room overlooked the city skyline, but neither of them paid attention to the view. The door closed quietly behind them, sealing out the noise of the summit floor. For a moment, neither spoke. They stood across from each other, the same distance that once separated them at their dining table. The difference now was awareness. Arden was the first to move. He removed his conference badge and placed it on the table, as if setting aside his title. "I didn't expect to see you here like this," he began carefully. Salira folded her hands loosely in front of her. "This is where my work led." He nodded once, then exhaled slowly. "I've spent months telling myself I was under pressure," he said. "That the board, the investors, the expansion demands, pushed me into saying something I didn't mean." She did not interrupt. "But that isn't the full truth," he continued. "The truth is, I was afraid." The word lingered. "Afraid of what?" she asked evenly. "Losing control," he replied. Every major step in my life came from structure, planning, precision. I believed if I controlled outcomes, nothing could destabilize me. His voice remained steady, but his eyes no longer avoided hers. When you questioned our marriage, it felt like something I couldn't measure or fix through effort. I didn't know how to respond without feeling exposed. He paused. I reacted by distancing myself emotionally. I convinced myself that detachment was strength. The admission did not carry defensiveness. It carried realization. I thought if I stayed focused on expansion, growth would justify everything. I didn't see that control without connection creates isolation. Salira watched him carefully. He was not arguing. He was unraveling a belief he once protected fiercely. For the first time since she left, he was not explaining circumstances. He was examining himself. Arden stepped closer to the table but remained standing. I need to say something clearly, he continued. When I told you I never truly loved you, that wasn't honest. It was defensive. Salira's expression remained composed, but her posture straightened slightly. I tied love to achievement, he said quietly. If I succeeded, I believed I was worthy. If I built something strong enough, it meant I mattered. He paused, searching for clarity. When you supported me in the early years, I saw your encouragement as fuel, motivation, stability, but I rarely stopped to ask what you needed in return. His jaw tightened briefly before he forced himself to continue. I believed providing a strong future was proof of love. I equated long hours with commitment, expansion with responsibility, and when that wasn't enough, she asked. I felt inadequate, he admitted. Instead of confronting that, I protected myself by reducing what we had. I convinced myself distance was truth. The room felt smaller. I thought emotional dependence would weaken my authority, he continued. So I separated love from leadership. I treated them as competing forces. He looked directly at her now. I see how wrong that was. Silence settled between them again. He did not reach for her. He did not attempt dramatic apology. He simply stood in recognition of his own pattern. For years, I believed strength meant never needing reassurance, he said. But when you asked if our marriage mattered, I realized I had no answer that wasn't tied to performance. He inhaled slowly, and that scared me. Salira remained silent for several seconds before speaking. I waited a long time for you to say something like that, she said calmly. Her tone was not bitter. It was measured. I supported your company because I believed in your discipline. I believed in your vision. But somewhere along the way, I began reducing my own ambitions to keep space for yours. She moved toward the window briefly, then turned back. When you were overwhelmed, I adjusted. When you canceled plans, I reassured myself it was temporary. When conversations revolved only around expansion, I told myself partnership meant patience. Her voice remained steady, but patience became self-erasure. Arden did not interrupt. I stopped bringing up my own ideas because I didn't want to add pressure. I stopped expecting emotional presence because I didn't want to appear demanding. She held his gaze firmly now. I began shrinking my voice to protect your comfort. The words were direct, not accusatory. Accurate. I didn't resent you at first, she continued. I told myself we were building something together, but eventually I realized I was the only one adjusting. She stepped closer to the table. When you said you never truly loved me, it confirmed what I'd been slowly feeling, that my presence had become convenient rather than essential. Arden lowered his eyes briefly. I didn't leave to punish you, she added. I left because I refused to disappear any further. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. I built the incubator because I wanted to lead in a way that honored both structure and humanity. I wasn't trying to compete with you. She paused. I was trying to remember myself. The room felt different now, not tense, clear. Salira folded her arms lightly, not defensively, but firmly. I will never abandon my voice again, she said. The sentence carried finality without hostility. I will never reduce my work to background support so someone else can feel larger. I will never adjust my needs to preserve an image of stability. Arden listened without resistance. I loved you, she continued, and part of me always will. But love without mutual presence becomes imbalance. He nodded slowly. I don't want imbalance anymore, he said quietly. She studied him carefully. Wanting change is not the same as embodying it. He accepted the correction. "I know," he replied. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument they had shared in the past. Finally, Arden asked the question he had been holding back. "Is there any future left for us?" The words were not dramatic. They were uncertain. Salira did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the window again, watching the city move below. "I don't know," she said honestly. "What I do know is that I won't return to who I was." Her response was not rejection. It was boundary. The door outside the meeting room carried faint sounds of conversation from the summit floor. The world continued moving. Inside that room, time felt suspended. Arden understood something clearly for the first time. This was not about convincing her. It was about transformation, and transformation requires proof, not promises. He remained standing in front of her, waiting to see if growth could rebuild what pride once fractured. Now pause here. Should she forgive him? Or has too much damage already been done? Share your thoughts before we continue. The next chapter changes everything. The following afternoon, the summit schedule moved forward without pause. Arden took his place on stage for his own panel discussion on scalable infrastructure systems. The auditorium was nearly full again. Investors, analysts, and founders leaned forward in their seats with tablets ready. The moderator introduced him with respect. His credentials were still impressive. His company still commanded influence. But the atmosphere felt subtly different from previous years. After outlining Veil Dynamics' international expansion strategy and modular architecture framework, the moderator opened the floor for questions. A young founder stood first. Given the increasing emphasis on leadership balance and sustainable growth models, she began carefully. How does Veil Dynamics ensure that rapid expansion doesn't compromise internal clarity or long-term stability? The question was framed professionally, yet it carried context. The room had listened to Salira's panel the day before. Arden adjusted the microphone. "We maintain structured oversight across all departments," he replied. "Our leadership team monitors performance metrics closely to ensure alignment." The founder nodded slightly but did not sit down. "I understand the operational systems," she continued. "I'm asking about executive alignment. How do you personally maintain clarity under pressure?" The room grew quieter. Arden paused longer than intended. He was accustomed to strategic questions about data, infrastructure, or competitive advantage. This was different. "Clarity comes from discipline," he answered finally. "Preparation and structured delegation reduce instability." The moderator offered a polite smile, but several attendees exchanged subtle glances. Another investor raised his hand. "Do you believe emotional accountability plays a role in executive decision-making?" The phrasing was deliberate. Arden felt the weight of the question more personally than publicly. He responded with measured composure, but internally something shifted. For the first time in years, he was not fully certain that his framework alone was enough. The stage lights felt warmer than usual, and the room was no longer simply listening. It was evaluating. As the discussion continued, the questions grew more nuanced. A venture partner from London leaned forward and spoke into the microphone. "Many founders burn out during accelerated growth phases. Some organizations fracture internally before financial indicators reveal strain. How does Veil Dynamics prevent that pattern at the executive level?" Arden opened his mouth to respond automatically. Then he stopped. The prepared language in his mind suddenly felt incomplete. For years, he would have cited performance audits, structured reporting systems, and layered oversight protocols. Those answers once satisfied audiences. Today, they sounded technical, distant. He spoke anyway. "We prioritize efficiency and measurable accountability," he said carefully. "Our teams are supported through clearly defined structures." The venture partner nodded but pressed further. "And at the personal level, leadership begins with individuals." The room remained silent. Arden felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not defensiveness, uncertainty. For the first time, he realized that his usual answers no longer addressed the underlying question. How does a leader maintain balance when personal clarity erodes? He could not reference policy for that. He cleared his throat slightly. "Leadership is evolving," he admitted. "We are continuously refining how we define sustainability within expansion." The statement was cautious, measured, but not fully confident. As the panel concluded, Applause followed politely. Not the sustained recognition Salira received. Professional. Reserved. As he stepped off stage, he understood something clearly. Markets were not only evaluating business models, they were evaluating leaders. And his own reflection was no longer hidden behind numbers. Later that evening, a private investor reception gathered select executives in a smaller conference hall. The atmosphere was less formal, but equally strategic. Arden stood near a display table reviewing summit materials when he overheard part of a nearby conversation. Salira's framework integrates internal assessment before scaling, one investor remarked. It reduces volatility. Another responded, Veil dynamics moves faster, but markets are recalibrating. Speed alone isn't the differentiator it used to be. Arden remained still, listening without interrupting. A third voice added, her incubator emphasizes leadership presence. Founders seem more grounded. Investors appreciate that. Grounded. The word lingered. He stepped forward and joined the circle, greeting them professionally. The conversation shifted briefly, but comparisons continued in subtle form. Both models have merit, one partner said diplomatically. But long-term stability depends on internal coherence. Internal coherence. The phrase felt precise. He understood what they were implying. Expansion without emotional clarity creates unpredictability. He had once dismissed such considerations as secondary. Now they were central to investor confidence. As the reception continued, he noticed how frequently her name surfaced in discussion. Not competitively. Comparatively. She represented adjustment. He represented acceleration. And the market was evaluating which approach aligned better with emerging expectations. Arden excused himself early and stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the city. The air felt cooler there. For years he believed dominance required forward motion at all costs. Now he recognized something else. Forward motion without internal stability invites fracture, and fracture rarely appears all at once. It reveals itself through erosion. Standing alone on the terrace, Arden rested his hands against the railing and allowed the evening noise to fade behind him. For months, he had defended his decisions internally. Pressure justified detachment. Responsibility justified absence. Expansion justified emotional distance. He repeated those arguments so often they became habit. Tonight, he stopped. He replayed the pattern clearly. Missed dinners. Canceled trips. Conversations shortened by distraction. He told himself it was temporary. He believed success would eventually repair everything. But success does not repair what neglect erodes. Salira had not left impulsively. She had left after gradual withdrawal from a partnership that no longer acknowledged her voice. He recognized the same pattern now appearing inside his company. When leaders operate without presence, teams feel it. When executives ignore imbalance, markets sense it. He saw the connection fully for the first time. The instability investors questioned was not purely operational. It reflected leadership misalignment, and leadership misalignment began at home long before it appeared in boardrooms. For the first time, he did not defend himself. He did not blame timing. He did not attribute it solely to pressure. He accepted the truth. He built a company that thrived on structure, but he neglected the emotional structure that sustained his life. The cost was not limited to his marriage. It extended into perception, into credibility, into confidence. The terrace lights flickered slightly as wind moved through the space. Arden exhaled slowly. Accountability felt heavier than pride, yet it also felt clarifying. For the first time since she walked away, he stopped constructing internal arguments and began considering change, not strategic repositioning, not public image refinement. Change. The realization did not solve everything, but it stripped away illusion, and in that clarity, something new began forming. Not control, understanding. Within 6 months of its launch, the incubator had outgrown its original Seattle workspace. What began as a single collaborative office with a handful of founders had evolved into a structured initiative drawing national attention. Applications arrived from Portland, Denver, Austin, and Chicago. Founders from diverse industries sought admission, not only for funding guidance, but for leadership development rooted in discipline and clarity. Salira did not expand impulsively. She analyzed each request carefully. She assessed local mentorship networks, evaluated available advisors, and reviewed community infrastructure before approving any satellite location. Her model prioritized intentional growth rather than rapid duplication. The first additional hub opened in Portland, supported by a coalition of experienced entrepreneurs and ethical investment partners. Shortly afterward, Denver followed with a smaller cohort program tailored to sustainability-focused startups. Media coverage framed the expansion as strategic rather than aggressive. Headlines described it as measured scaling built on mentorship foundations. Investors praised the approach for maintaining cultural consistency across locations. Each city adopted the same core framework: peer accountability sessions, leadership reflection workshops, and structured milestone evaluations. Celira traveled frequently during the initial rollout, but unlike the travel Arden once managed, her schedule included built-in reflection blocks. She maintained direct communication with each city lead. Weekly virtual alignment meetings ensured consistency across regions. She was not chasing visibility. She was building structure. Her leadership style mirrored the values she articulated publicly: calm oversight, deliberate pacing, clear expectations. As the initiative grew, the narrative around her shifted from rising founder to institutional architect. She was no longer leading a program. She was shaping a model, and with each expansion, the foundation strengthened rather than stretched thin. For the first time in years, her ambition moved forward without compression or compromise. She was not filling someone else's shadow. She was casting her own. Recognition followed organically. At a regional startup showcase in Portland, one of the incubator's logistics founders addressed a packed audience after securing a major contract. "We wouldn't have structured our leadership framework this way without Celira's guidance," he said. "She taught us that discipline without reflection leads to burnout." The audience applauded. Another founder in Denver echoed similar sentiments during a media interview. "She doesn't hand out shortcuts," the founder explained. "She asks the questions we avoid. She challenges our blind spots before they become operational weaknesses." These statements circulated across professional networks quickly. Industry podcasts invited Celira to speak about mentorship philosophy. Thought leadership blogs referenced her incubator as a case study in sustainable innovation. In each appearance, founders emphasized her influence not as controlling, but clarifying. She did not dominate rooms. She structured them. She did not impose identity on founders. She helped them uncover it. At a national entrepreneurship conference, a panel of early-stage founders was asked about transformative mentors. 3 separate participants mentioned her name. The moderator noted the consistency with visible curiosity. "She seems to be shaping leaders rather than just companies," he observed. That distinction mattered. Celira listened to these acknowledgments with quiet composure. She did not exaggerate credit. She redirected praise toward the teams and mentors supporting the ecosystem. Yet internally she felt something steady. For years, she supported growth behind the scenes. Her contributions went largely unnoticed within her own marriage. Now the people she mentored spoke openly about her influence. Not in private gratitude, in public recognition. The difference was significant. It was not about validation. It was about alignment. Her work reflected her voice fully, and others were amplifying it without her needing to ask. During the second evening of the summit, Celira attended a roundtable discussion hosted by policy advisors and institutional investors. The room carried less spectacle than the main auditorium, but equal strategic weight. She participated calmly, offering perspective on regulatory alignment and founder well-being metrics. Her responses were precise, thoughtful, and grounded in observable data. Observers noted how she maintained authority without defensiveness. She did not raise her voice. She did not overstate conclusions. Her confidence rested on clarity. A senior investment director approached her afterward. "You speak with certainty," he remarked. "Where does that come from?" She smiled lightly. "Consistency," she replied. "When your actions align with your values, uncertainty decreases." The answer was simple, but it carried depth. Years earlier, she questioned herself quietly while adjusting to someone else's rhythm. She once hesitated to assert perspective if it might disrupt balance. Now she spoke without contraction, not aggressively, firmly. Her presence no longer felt like support. It felt central. She carried herself differently too. Her posture remained relaxed yet deliberate. Her gaze steady. her tone composed under scrutiny. The transformation was not cosmetic. It was internal. She no longer measured her worth against someone else's expansion. She measured it against integrity. Confidence rooted in comparison fluctuates. Confidence rooted in alignment stabilizes. As conversations continued around her, she recognized something clearly. She was no longer reacting to absence. She was leading from presence. And that shift required no announcement. It was visible in every room she entered. Later that night, alone in her hotel room overlooking the city skyline, Salira allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection. The summit had been intense. Conversations layered over one another. Opportunities expanded rapidly. But now, in stillness, her thoughts drifted briefly toward Arden. She did not feel resentment. She did not feel longing. She felt recognition. She once loved him deeply. She loved his discipline, his focus, his determination to reshape his life beyond early limitations. She remembered the waterfront walks and long discussions about building meaningful futures. She remembered believing they could align ambition and intimacy seamlessly. That belief had not been foolish. It had been hopeful. What changed was not love itself. It was imbalance. She no longer defined herself by the role of supporter. She no longer waited for acknowledgement that might arrive after the next milestone. She loved him once. Now she loved herself with equal intensity. That difference altered everything. A soft notification appeared on her phone. A message from Arden. "Before you leave tomorrow, may we speak once more?" She stared at the screen for several seconds. The request did not trigger panic. It did not create urgency. It created pause. She was no longer waiting for him to recognize her value. If they spoke again, it would not be from desperation. It would be from choice. She placed the phone down gently. She was not running toward reconciliation. She was not running from it either. For the first time, she stood still in her own center. Arden had asked for one final meeting, and this time the decision would not revolve around his control. It would revolve around her clarity. The waterfront was quiet that evening. The same stretch of shoreline, where they once walked in the early years of their marriage, now carried a different weight. The city lights reflected softly against the water, steady and distant. The air felt cooler, calmer than the conference halls they had just left. Arden stood near the railing when Salira approached. This time, there was no audience, no investors, no applause, just them. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. "I wanted clarity," she replied. He nodded once and looked toward the water before speaking. "I've already begun restructuring Veil Dynamics." She did not react immediately. "I met with the board this morning," he continued. "I'm stepping back from sole executive oversight. We're appointing a CEO model. Operational strategy will remain with me, but executive alignment and internal development will be led jointly." She studied him carefully. "That's a significant shift," she said. "It's necessary," he answered. "I built the company to reflect discipline, but discipline without reflection created blind spots. I'm instituting executive coaching for the entire leadership team, including myself." The admission was steady, not performative. "I also canceled the next overseas expansion round," he added. "We're consolidating our current markets before scaling further." The decision carried financial risk. It would slow momentum. Investors might question it, but he did not speak from pressure. He spoke from understanding. "I've spent years believing speed proved strength," he said. "Now I see that stability proves maturity." The water moved steadily below them. Salira remained silent for several seconds. He did not rush to fill the space. For once, he allowed quiet to exist without forcing direction. "I'm not restructuring for optics," he continued calmly. "I'm restructuring because I finally understand what absence cost me." She could hear the difference. This was not damage control. This was recalibration. Salira turned slightly toward him. "You've made structural changes," she said. "But structure alone won't rebuild what was lost." "I know," Arden replied immediately. He did not argue. He did not defend. "I've started therapy," he said. "Not crisis counseling, ongoing work. I realized I don't understand why I equate vulnerability with weakness. That belief shaped more than my leadership. The honesty landed differently than previous explanations. I thought performance replaced presence, he continued. I believed providing stability excused emotional distance. I see now that distance erodes trust quietly. Salira folded her arms lightly, not in resistance, but reflection. What does change look like beyond executive restructuring? She asked. It looks like accountability without defensiveness, he answered. It looks like listening without preparing rebuttals. It looks like scheduling time that cannot be displaced by business. He paused before adding, it looks like not tying my worth to achievement. The words were deliberate. For years, achievement defined him publicly and privately. Detaching from that identity required more than strategy. It required internal shift. I won't promise perfection, he said, but I will commit to consistency. The waterfront breeze moved between them gently. I can't ask you to return to what we had, he added, because what we had depended on you adjusting. Salira's expression softened slightly. I'm not asking for forgiveness out of nostalgia, he said. I'm asking for the chance to rebuild something healthier. The difference mattered. He was not pleading from fear of loneliness. He was speaking from recognition of responsibility. For the first time, she saw him without the armor of certainty, and he did not attempt to hide it. I don't expect an answer tonight, Arden continued quietly, and I don't expect immediate reconciliation. Salira looked at him carefully. What are you asking for? She said. A beginning, he replied. Not a reset. A beginning. He stepped slightly closer but kept respectful distance. I want to start with conversations, scheduled, intentional, uninterrupted. I want to attend one of your incubator sessions and listen, not as an executive evaluating strategy, as someone learning. She absorbed the offer. I want us to rebuild from transparency, he added. If something feels imbalanced, we address it immediately. No silent adjustments, no assumptions. His voice remained steady. I will not compete with your growth. I will support it openly. The statement carried weight. For years, unspoken competitions shaped their dynamic. His expansion often overshadowed her ambitions. Now he acknowledged that pattern directly. We move slowly, he said. We re-establish trust step by step. If at any point you feel yourself shrinking again, you walk away. The condition surprised her slightly. You're giving me the exit, she said. I'm giving you autonomy, he corrected gently. Silence stretched between them again. The waterfront mirrored their early years, but the dynamic felt entirely different. There was no urgency, no emotional rush, only measured intention. I won't pressure you, he said quietly. I will demonstrate change. The simplicity of that sentence mattered. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just commitment to process. I don't know if I can trust this, she says. You've been certain before, and certainty hurt me. She looks at him, eyes steady. You don't lose someone by accident, Arden. You lose them gradually, one dismissed conversation at a time. That line should land. She turns toward the water. For months, I rebuilt myself without you. I found peace. I found clarity. I'm not willing to risk losing that again. Arden's composure cracks for the first time. He steps back, runs a hand through his hair, and his voice loses its steadiness. I built a company that survived global downturns, he says quietly. But I couldn't protect the one relationship that mattered most. He swallows hard. I thought strength meant not needing you. The truth is, I didn't know how much I depended on you until you were gone. His voice lowers further. The house feels empty, the office feels loud, and none of it feels like success without you there to ground me. I am truly sorry. Salira turned toward the water, allowing her thoughts to settle fully before responding. For months, she had rebuilt herself outside the structure of their marriage. She rediscovered her voice, her ambition, her autonomy. Returning blindly was not an option, but neither was ignoring growth when it appeared genuine. If we try again, she began slowly, it won't look like before. He nodded. I will not reduce my schedule to accommodate your expansion, she continued. My work matters equally. I understand, he said. There will be boundaries, she added. If I feel unheard, I will say so immediately. If you feel overwhelmed, you will say so instead of retreating. He accepted each condition without hesitation. We attend counseling together, she said. Not because we're broken, Because we're rebuilding. He nodded again. And if we find that our paths no longer align, she finished, we part respectfully. The terms were clear, structured, balanced. Arden stepped closer, but this time she closed the remaining distance herself. Not out of obligation, out of choice. I'm willing to try, she said quietly. The words were calm, not emotional, deliberate. He exhaled slowly, relief passing across his features without exaggeration. They stood there for a moment, the water steady beneath the city lights. This was not a dramatic reunion. It was an agreement. Two leaders choosing partnership with awareness. Two individuals refusing to repeat imbalance. The past remained part of their story, but it no longer dictated their direction. They would move forward carefully, together, not from fear of loss, but from clarity of value. Months after the summit, subtle but steady changes began shaping Vale dynamics. Arden no longer dominated every executive meeting. Instead of controlling each strategic decision, he created structured space for shared leadership. The co-CEO model initially drew skepticism from some investors, but results gradually silenced doubt. Internal retention improved. Department heads reported clearer communication across teams. Strategy sessions expanded beyond performance metrics to include long-term cultural alignment. Feedback channels were formalized, not as symbolic gestures, but as operational requirements. Arden participated fully. He no longer viewed emotional accountability as peripheral to corporate strength. He recognized it as foundational. Weekly leadership reflection meetings were integrated into executive schedules. No cancellations, no postponements. For the first time, he measured success not only by quarterly growth, but by internal stability. Expansion resumed eventually, but with deliberate pacing. New markets were evaluated through both financial and cultural readiness assessments. Partnerships were built with transparent communication rather than accelerated timelines. Outside the office, his transformation carried equal weight. He attended counseling sessions with Salira consistently. He listened without interruption. When tension surfaced, he addressed it directly instead of retreating into work. There were moments of discomfort. Old habits attempted to resurface under pressure, but awareness now interrupted them before they became patterns. Salira continued expanding her multi-city initiative. Their schedules remained demanding, yet intentional space for each other was no longer optional. They did not rebuild overnight. Trust reformed gradually, shaped by repeated action rather than dramatic promises. And through that process, Arden understood something fully. Ambition without presence creates emptiness. He had built an empire once, but he nearly lost the partnership that grounded it. Now he pursued growth with alignment, not because markets demanded it, because clarity required it. This story was never about business rivalry. It was about imbalance. It was about what happens when achievement overshadows connection, when support goes unrecognized, when silence replaces dialogue. Arden learned that discipline alone does not sustain love. Salira proved that self-respect does not require hostility. Their reunion was not fueled by nostalgia. It was built on accountability. Support without recognition creates distance. Salira once adjusted quietly to protect his comfort. When she stopped shrinking herself, she reclaimed her voice. That shift changed everything. Love requires attention now, not after the next milestone, not after expansion stabilizes. Now, because absence accumulates quietly, and by the time it is visible, it may already be too late. Their story reminds us that growth is not only external, it is internal, and leadership begins with self-examination. Now I want to hear from you. If you were Salira, what would you have chosen? Would you have walked away permanently, or rebuilt with boundaries? And tell me honestly, can love survive when respect disappears? Share your thoughts in the comments. If stories like this challenge the way you see relationships, ambition, and accountability, subscribe for more powerful relationship journeys. Because sometimes the most important transformations don't happen in boardrooms. They happen in conversations we avoid. And when we face them, everything changes.